The moment Clara Finnegan discovered the first letter tucked inside a seed catalog meant for Mrs. Henderson, she knew she should have simply redirected it and moved on with her duties as postmistress of Desdemona, Texas. But the envelope bore no return address, and the handwriting looked desperate in a way she could not quite explain. It was August of 1882, and the summer heat had turned the small post office into an oven by midday. Clara fanned herself with the misaddressed envelope, debating whether opening it would constitute a breach of her professional ethics. The letter was addressed to someone named Catherine Foster in San Antonio, but it had ended up in her stack of deliveries by some sorting error from the Houston depot. She set it aside with the intention of marking it for return, but by the end of that sweltering day, curiosity won out over propriety. Clara told herself she needed to read it to determine if there might be an alternate address inside, some clue as to where it truly belonged. The wax seal broke easily under her letter opener, and she unfolded the single sheet of paper with hands that trembled slightly, though she blamed that on too much coffee and not enough lunch. The letter began simply enough. Dear Catherine, today I watched the sun rise over the canyon and thought of your eyes. Clara's breath caught. She glanced toward the window of the post office, making sure no one was peering in, though most of Desdemona's residents were home for supper by this hour. I know you told me to stop writing, that these letters only make things harder, but I cannot help myself. Each morning I wake and the first thought in my mind is of you. Each night I lie down and wonder if you are looking at the same stars. The letter was signed only with the initial P. Clara read it 3 more times before carefully folding it back into its envelope. She placed it in the drawer of her desk, underneath the ledger where she tracked money orders. That night, lying in the small room she rented above the general store, she kept thinking about those words. The longing in them felt almost tangible, like something she could reach out and touch. She was 24 years old and had been the postmistress of Desdemona for 2 years, ever since her father died and left her with few options for respectable employment. The position came with a small salary and a great deal of solitude. Most of the young men in town were either already married or had no interest in a woman who could read Latin and kept her hair pinned so severely back. The second letter arrived 3 days later, mixed in with newspapers from Dallas. This one was also addressed to Catherine Foster in San Antonio, also bearing that same careful handwriting. Clara felt her pulse quicken when she spotted it. This time she did not even pretend she would send it back. She opened it as soon as the stage driver departed, barely waiting for the dust to settle. Dear Catherine, I saw a roadrunner this morning racing across the desert. It made me laugh, which I have not done in weeks. I wanted to tell you about it. Is that foolish? I want to tell you about everything, all the small moments that make up my days. Yesterday, I helped a calf that was stuck in the brush. The day before, I lost my hat to a strong wind and had to chase it for half a mile. These things mean nothing to anyone else, but I think they might mean something to you. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. Who was this man who wrote with such openness, such vulnerability? And who was Catherine Foster that she had told him to stop writing? The rational part of Clara's mind knew she should inquire with San Antonio, find out where this Catherine lived, ensure these letters reached their intended recipient. But something stopped her, some selfish instinct she did not entirely understand. The letters continued to arrive, never regularly enough to establish a pattern, but frequent enough that Clara began to anticipate them. Sometimes 2 would come in a week, sometimes none for 10 days. Each one she opened, read, and stored in her desk drawer. They were never long, usually just a single page, but they contained such intimate observations that Clara felt as though she was being led into someone's private thoughts. Dear Catherine, there was a storm last night that shook the walls of the bunkhouse, thunder like cannon fire. I thought of the night we spent in your aunt's barn, how you were not afraid of anything, how you laughed when lightning lit up the sky. I wish I had your courage. Dear Catherine, one of the other ranch hands asked me why I never go into town with them on Saturday nights. I told him I was saving my money, but the truth is I cannot stand the noise and the drinking and the pretending to be interested in things that do not matter. The only place I want to be is somewhere I cannot go. Dear Catherine, I am forgetting the sound of your voice. That terrifies me more than anything. I lie awake trying to remember exactly how you said my name, but it slips away like water through my fingers. Please, if you can, send me something, just a few words so I can hear you again, even if only in my mind. That last letter made Clara's eyes sting with tears. She found herself angry at this Catherine Foster, whoever she was, for not responding to someone who clearly adored her. What kind of woman would ignore such devotion? It was late September when Clara finally learned the truth. She was sorting through a stack of mail that had been delayed due to flooding along the postal route when she found another letter addressed to Catherine Foster. But this one had a forwarding notice stamped across the front in official ink. Deceased, May 1882. The letter opener fell from Clara's hand and clattered against the wooden floor. Catherine Foster was dead, had been dead since May. All these letters, dozens of them by now, were being written to a woman who would never read them. The man with the careful handwriting and the tender words did not know that his Catherine was gone. Clara sat down heavily in her chair, the forwarding notice still in her hand. She should have inquired sooner. She should have done her job properly instead of indulging in this strange voyeurism. Now this man, whoever he was pouring his heart out to a ghost. The ethical thing to do would be to write to him, explain the situation. But how? The letters never included a return address. She checked every single one she had saved, spreading them across her desk like cards in a game of solitaire. None of them had anything more than the initial P for a signature. No ranch name, no town. They were postmarked from different locations, suggesting he traveled frequently or mailed them from various places to avoid establishing a pattern. Perhaps he feared someone intercepting them. Clara rewrapped the letters in their ribbon and placed them back in her drawer. She told herself she would figure out what to do, but days turned into weeks and still the letters came. Dear Catherine, winter is coming early this year. I can feel it in the wind. The cattle are restless, sensing the change. I wonder if you are somewhere warm. I like to imagine that you are happy and safe and thinking of me at least sometimes. Dear Catherine, I met a woman in town today who had your color hair. For a moment my heart stopped, but of course it was not you. It will never be you. I do not know how to accept that. Each letter made Clara's guilt grow heavier, but it also made her feel less alone. She began to anticipate them not just with curiosity, but with genuine eagerness. The mysterious P had become a strange sort of companion. His observations about the world around him were so vivid that she could almost see the landscapes he described. The ranch where he worked, the endless Texas sky. October brought cooler temperatures and a new problem. The Postmaster General's office sent a notice that they were cracking down on misdelivered mail. Clara was required to submit a report of any letters that had been received in error over the past quarter. She stared at the notice for a long time, then at her desk drawer, where more than 30 letters now resided. She could not possibly report them without having to turn them over, and she could not bear the thought of some bureaucrat in Houston reading them, dismissing them as the ravings of a lovesick fool. That night, Clara did something she had never done before. She responded. Sitting at the small desk in her rented room, she pulled out a sheet of her personal stationery and began to write. Dear P, I do not know your name or where you are, but I have been reading your letters to Catherine Foster. I know I should not have opened them. I know this is a terrible breach of trust and professional conduct, but I need you to know that Catherine passed away in May. I am so sorry. Your letters never reached her, but they did reach someone who has been moved by every single word. She signed it only as C, addressing the envelope to P in care of General Delivery, Desdemona, Texas. It was a shot in the dark. He might never come to collect mail here. He might be hundreds of miles away. But she had to try. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Clara went about her duties with a distraction that did not go unnoticed. Mrs. Henderson commented that she seemed troubled. Mr. Walsh at the general store asked if she was feeling poorly. She assured everyone she was fine, just tired from the longer hours as the holiday mail season approached. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late October, a man walked into the post office. Clara was sorting through a shipment of parcels and did not look up immediately. I will be with you in just a moment, she said, focusing on a particularly stubborn knot in the twine around a box. I am looking for a letter, the man said. His voice was deep and quiet, with the slight roughness of someone who spent more time with animals than people. General Delivery under P. Clara's hands froze. Slowly she raised her eyes. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who worked hard physically. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested he squinted often against the sun. Dark brown hair curled slightly where it touched the collar of his shirt. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously by the brim, but it was his eyes that struck her most. They were the color of amber in sunlight, and they held a wariness that made her heart ache. P, she managed to say. Patrick Xavier, he said. I know it is unusual to ask, but I thought someone might have written me here. I realize that sounds strange without context, but Wait here, Clara interrupted. She went to the back room where she kept her personal items and retrieved the stack of letters. Her own letter, the one she had sent to him, was not among them since he had presumably received it. When she returned to the front, Patrick Xavier was still standing exactly where she had left him, his hat now clutched between both hands. Clara set the stack on the counter between them. My name is Clara Finnegan. I am the postmistress here, and I owe you an explanation and an apology. Patrick stared at the letters. She watched his face change as he recognized his own handwriting on the envelopes. I do not understand, he said quietly. These letters were all addressed to Catherine Foster in San Antonio, Clara began. Her throat felt tight. But they were misrouted to Desdemona. I should have sent them back or forwarded them properly. Instead, I opened them. I read them, all of them. Patrick's expression shifted through confusion, anger, and finally settled on something Clara could not quite read. You read them, he repeated. Yes. I know it was wrong. I have no excuse except that the first one I opened out of curiosity, and after that, I could not stop. Your words were so beautiful, so full of feeling. I felt less alone when I read them. She was speaking too fast now, words tumbling out. And then I discovered that Catherine had died in May. The post office in San Antonio stamped one of the later letters. I tried to find a way to tell you, but you never included a return address. Patrick set his hat on the counter. His hands were shaking slightly. Catherine died in May, he said, not as a question, but as if testing the words. I am so sorry. I should have found a way to tell you sooner. I should have done many things differently. Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. Your letters deserved to reach someone who loved you, not a stranger who had no right to them. How did she die? Patrick asked. Clara hesitated. I do not know the details. The forwarding notice just said deceased. If you would like, I could make inquiries with the San Antonio postmaster. They might have more information. Patrick nodded slowly, then reached out and touched the top envelope in the stack. These past months, I have been writing to a ghost. You could not have known. Could I not? Patrick's voice was rough. Catherine told me to stop writing. She said her father had forbidden her from seeing me, that I was making things impossible for her, but I could not let go. I thought if I kept writing, if I showed her that my feelings would not change, she might find a way back to me. I thought I was being romantic, but maybe I was just being selfish. There is nothing selfish about love, Clara said quietly. Patrick finally looked directly at her, really looked at her, and Clara felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. You read all of these, every single one. Then you know things about me that no one else knows. You know what I think about when I cannot sleep. You know what makes me laugh. You know all the broken parts I tried to hide from everyone else. He did not sound angry now, just tired and exposed. I know that you are a good man, Clara said. I know that you notice small, beautiful things in the world. I know that you love deeply and truly. Those are not broken parts, Patrick Xavier. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they were wet. I came here expecting to be angry. I received your letter 3 days ago. I have spent that time riding from the ranch where I work, going over and over what I would say to the person who had invaded my privacy so thoroughly. But now I am standing here, and all I feel is relief that someone knows. That someone heard me, even if it was not the person I intended. Clara reached out before she could stop herself and placed her hand over his on the counter. I heard you, she said. Every word. They stood like that for a moment, connected by the weight of stolen intimacy and shared grief. Then Patrick gently pulled his hand back and Clara felt the loss of contact like a cold wind. I should take these, Patrick said, gesturing to the letters. They belong to me, I suppose, though it feels strange to claim them now. Of course. Clara pushed the stack toward him. Again, I am truly sorry. Patrick gathered the letters and tucked them inside his coat. He put his hat back on, adjusting the brim low over his eyes. Thank you for telling me about Catherine. I know you did not have to. Wait, Clara said as he turned to leave. Will you come back? Patrick paused in the doorway, his back still to her. Why would I do that? Because I would like to know you. The real you, not just the version that exists in those letters. I know I have no right to ask, but I am asking anyway. He looked back over his shoulder, and Clara saw something in his expression that might have been the beginning of a smile. You are right. You have no right to ask. Then he walked out into the October sunshine, and Clara was left alone with the lingering scent of leather and dust. The next 3 days were torture. Clara second-guessed every word she had said, every gesture she had made. She had been too forward, too presumptuous. Patrick Xavier had every reason to never want to see her again. She had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible, and her apology had been inadequate at best. On the 4th day, a letter arrived at the post office. It was addressed to Miss Clara Finnegan, Postmistress, Desdemona, Texas. The handwriting was immediately familiar. Clara's hands shook as she opened it right there at the counter, not even bothering to wait until she was alone. Dear Clara, I have been thinking about what you said, about wanting to know the real me. I have also been thinking about the fact that you read dozens of my letters and did not recoil in disgust or pity. That is rarer than you might think. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch, about 15 miles northwest of Desdemona. If you are serious about your invitation, I will be in town on Saturday. There is a church social that Mrs. Henderson mentioned to me. Perhaps we could attend together. If you have changed your mind, I will understand. You owe me nothing, but I find that I would like to know you as well. Sincerely, Patrick Xavier. Clara read the letter 4 times, then pressed it to her chest and laughed with relief and joy. Mrs. Henderson, who had just walked in to mail a package, stared at her with open concern. "Are you quite all right, dear?" the older woman asked. "I am better than all right," Clara said. "Mrs. Henderson, tell me about this church social on Saturday." The social was being held to raise funds for a new church bell. The current one had cracked during a particularly cold winter and produced a sound more akin to a cow in distress than a call to worship. The entire town would be there, which meant Clara's attendance with Patrick would be noticed and discussed by everyone within a 50-mile radius by Sunday morning. She found herself not caring. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures mild enough to be pleasant. Clara chose her best dress, a deep blue calico that her mother had made for her 3 years ago. It was not fancy by any standard, but it was well made and fit her properly. She spent extra time with her hair, pinning it up in a softer style than her usual severe bun, allowing a few curls to frame her face. Patrick arrived at the post office at exactly 2 o'clock, as punctual as his letters had always been timely in their emotional honesty. He wore clean clothes and had obviously bathed and shaved. Clara caught herself noticing the line of his jaw, the way his hair curled when it was clean and not pressed down by a hat. "Miss Finnegan," he said formally, offering his arm. "Mr. Xavier," she replied, taking it. They walked to the church in silence, both acutely aware of the eyes watching from windows and doorways. Desdemona was not so large that a new man escorting the postmistress would go unnoticed. Clara held her head high, determined not to show any embarrassment or hesitation. The social was already in full swing when they arrived. Tables had been set up in the yard behind the church, covered with food donated by various families. A small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in the shade of a massive oak tree. Children ran in circles, taking advantage of the rare opportunity to make noise near the church without being scolded. Mrs. Henderson spotted them immediately and descended with the determination of a general marshalling troops. "Mr. Xavier, how lovely to see you again. And Clara, dear, you look positively radiant. Come, let me introduce you around." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions. Clara knew most people already, of course, but Patrick was relatively new to the area. He had been working at the Triple Bar Ranch for about 8 months, Mrs. Henderson explained to anyone who would listen. Came from somewhere east, kept to himself mostly, but was known as a hard worker and honest to a fault. Through it all, Patrick remained polite but reserved. Clara noticed how uncomfortable he seemed with the attention, how he positioned himself slightly behind her, as if she were a shield against the barrage of questions and curious looks. Finally, they managed to escape to the food tables. Clara handed Patrick a plate and began selecting items somewhat at random. Her stomach was too twisted with nerves to actually feel hungry. "You do not have to do this," Patrick said quietly as they moved down the table. "Do what?" "This. Subjecting yourself to gossip and speculation just to be kind to someone who you barely know." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Is that what you think this is? Kindness?" Patrick looked uncomfortable. "I am not good at understanding people's motivations. Catherine used to say I was too literal, that I could not read between the lines." "Then I will be clear," Clara said. "I am not here out of kindness or pity. I am here because I have spent months reading your words and feeling like I was getting to know someone extraordinary. I am here because when you walked into my post office, you were exactly who I hoped you would be. I am here because I want to be here, with you, nowhere else." A child ran between them chasing a ball, breaking the intensity of the moment. Patrick smiled, a real genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I am not extraordinary," he said. "I am just a ranch hand who talks too much in his letters." "You are wrong," Clara replied, "but I suppose I will have to prove that to you." They found a spot under a cottonwood tree and sat down to eat. The conversation started awkwardly, both of them too aware that they knew intimate things about each other while simultaneously being strangers. But gradually, as the afternoon wore on, they found their rhythm. Patrick told her about growing up in Tennessee, about losing his parents to yellow fever when he was 16, about drifting west with no particular destination in mind. Clara told him about her father, who had been postmaster before her, about her mother who had died when Clara was 12, about the loneliness of being the only woman in town who seemed more interested in books than marriage prospects. "Catherine was the daughter of a banker in Fort Worth," Patrick said eventually, his voice careful. "I met her when I was working on a ranch outside the city. She was visiting a friend and we met at a dance. For 3 months, we saw each other whenever we could. She was the first person who made me feel like I was not just drifting through life. Then her father found out about us. He did not approve of a poor ranch hand courting his daughter. He sent her to San Antonio to live with her aunt. She wrote me once after that, telling me not to follow her, not to write, but I did anyway." "I am sorry," Clara said. "That she did not get to read your letters, that you did not know." Patrick nodded slowly. "I think part of me knew something was wrong. The silence felt different than anger. But I could not let myself believe it. Believing it meant giving up, and I did not know how to do that." Clara took a risk and reached for his hand. Patrick looked down at their joined hands but did not pull away. "You do not have to give up," she said. "You just have to let yourself begin again." The sun was setting when the social finally began to wind down. Patrick walked Clara back to her room above the general store, neither of them in any hurry to end the evening. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped and turned to her. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Properly, I mean. Court you the way you deserve." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that very much." "I am not good at this," Patrick warned. "I will probably say the wrong thing or move too slowly or not know what I am supposed to do." "Patrick," Clara said gently, "you wrote beautiful letters every single day to someone you loved. You know exactly how to do this." He looked at her for a long moment, and Clara saw something shift in his expression, some wall beginning to crumble. "Can I write you letters?" he asked. "Even though you are right here in town and I could just visit. I think better when I write. I can say things I cannot manage face to face." "I would treasure every one of them," Clara said honestly. Patrick reached up and touched her cheek briefly, a gesture so tender that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Then he stepped back, put on his hat, and walked away into the gathering dusk. The letter was waiting for her at the post office on Monday morning. Clara found it tucked under the door, as if Patrick had delivered it himself, rather than trusting it to the official mail system. She carried it inside and sat down at her desk before opening it. "Dear Clara, I have been thinking about Saturday, turning every conversation over in my mind trying to determine if I said the right things, if I made you laugh enough, if I bored you with my stories about ranch work. This is what I do," Catherine used to say. "I overthink everything until the joy is wrung out of it. But I want to be better at this with you. I want to tell you that Saturday was one of the best days I have had in a very long time. That when you took my hand, I felt something shift inside me, like a door opening after being locked for months. I know we are just beginning. I know there is so much we still do not know about each other, but I want to learn. I want to know what makes you laugh and what keeps you awake at night and what you dream about when you let yourself imagine a different life. Yours, Patrick. Clara held the letter and smiled. Then she pulled out her own stationery and began to write back. Thus began the strangest and most wonderful courtship Desdemona, Texas, had ever seen. Patrick and Clara wrote to each other daily, despite the fact that Patrick rode into town at least 3 times a week. He would arrive at the post office, often dusty from the ride, and deliver his letter by hand. Clara would give him hers in return, already written and waiting. They would talk for a few minutes, sometimes longer if the post office was not busy, and then Patrick would leave to run whatever errands had brought him to town. But in the letters, they were completely honest with each other in ways they still struggled to be face to face. Patrick wrote about his fear that he was not good enough for her, that she would eventually see him as Catherine's father had, just a poor cowboy with no prospects. Clara wrote about her worry that she was too independent, too educated, too set in her ways for any man to truly want her as she was. Dear Patrick, Mrs. Henderson asked me today if you had proposed yet. When I told her we had only been courting for 3 weeks, she looked scandalized and said at our ages, we could not afford to waste time. I did not tell her that I already feel like I have known you for years. That in some ways we skipped past all the usual courtship rituals and went straight to the knowing of each other. Is that strange? That I feel so certain about you so quickly? Dear Clara, it is not strange at all. I feel the same way, but I do not want to rush you. I know my feelings, but you deserve time to be sure of yours. You deserve courtship and romance and all the things I am not very good at providing, though I am trying. I asked one of the other ranch hands what I should do to properly court a woman, and he suggested I bring you flowers. So I will do that next time I come to town. I hope you like wildflowers, because those are the only kind I know how to identify. Patrick did bring her wildflowers, a bouquet of Indian blanket and blue bonnets that he had clearly picked himself. Clara put them in a jar on her desk at the post office, and for days afterward, people commented on them. The older women smiled knowingly. The younger ones looked at Clara with envy. In November, Patrick invited Clara to visit the Triple Bar Ranch. He wanted her to see where he worked, where he spent most of his time. Clara borrowed a horse from Mr. Walsh and rode out on a Sunday afternoon, the one day the post office was closed. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling main house and several outbuildings. Patrick met her at the gate and gave her a tour, showing her the bunkhouse where he slept, the barn where he worked with the horses he was particularly good at training, and the wide open pastures where cattle grazed as far as the eye could see. It is beautiful, Clara said honestly. I can see why you love it here. It is peaceful, Patrick agreed. Out here things make sense. Animals are honest in ways people are not. If a horse does not like you, it will tell you directly. If a cow is sick, you can see it in how it moves. There is no pretending. They sat on a fence and watched the sun begin to descend toward the horizon. Patrick pointed out landmarks, telling her the names of distant hills and the history of various parts of the ranch. Clara watched his face as he talked, noting how animated he became when discussing things he cared about. I never thanked you, Patrick said suddenly. For what? For reading those letters. I know that sounds strange, but I have been thinking about it. If you had done your job properly, if you had simply sent them back or destroyed them, I would still be writing to a dead woman. I would still be trapped in that grief, not knowing. You freed me from that, even if it was not your intention. Clara felt her throat tighten. I think I needed those letters as much as you needed to write them. I was so lonely, Patrick. Everyone in this town has known me since I was a child. They see me as the postmistress, the practical woman who will never marry, who will grow old organizing other people's correspondence. But in your letters, I got to see the world through someone else's eyes. I got to feel things I had almost given up on feeling." Patrick reached over and took her hand. It was becoming easier for him to do that, Clara noticed. The physical distance between them was shrinking gradually, comfortably. "You will never be just the postmistress to me," he said. "You are Clara. You are the woman who laughs at my terrible jokes in letters. You are the person who makes me want to be better at saying things out loud instead of only on paper. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up." Clara turned to face him fully. "Patrick, Xavier, are you going to kiss me, or do I need to make the first move?" Patrick laughed, a sound of pure joy that Clara had only heard from him a handful of times. "I want to," he admitted. "I have wanted to for weeks, but I was not sure if you wanted me to, and I did not want to presume." "I am sure," Clara said firmly. "I am very, very sure." Patrick leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle and careful and perfect. Clara's entire body seemed to light up from the inside. She had been kissed before, awkward encounters with boys when she was younger, but nothing had felt like this. Nothing had felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered. "I think I have been falling since you first wrote back to me." "Good," Clara whispered back, "because I am already in love with you." The ride back to Desdemona that evening felt like floating. Clara could not stop smiling, and she caught herself touching her lips, remembering the kiss. When she returned the horse to Mr. Walsh, he took one look at her face and grinned. "I suppose I should start preparing for a wedding," he said. "Perhaps," Clara replied, not even trying to hide her happiness. The letter appeared under her door the next morning, as always. "Dear Clara, I cannot sleep. I keep thinking about yesterday, about kissing you, about the way you looked at me when you said you loved me. I have been loved before, or I thought I had, but this feels different. With Catherine, I was always trying to be someone I thought she wanted. I was performing the role of the romantic cowboy, the one who wrote pretty words and made grand gestures. With you, I can just be myself. You have already seen my rawest thoughts, my most vulnerable moments, and you did not turn away. That is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me. I want to marry you, Clara. I know it is too soon to ask properly, but I need you to know that is where my heart is. When you are ready, when you feel certain, I will be here. Yours always, Patrick." Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she sat down and wrote her response. "Dear Patrick, it is not too soon. Ask me. Yours always, Clara." Patrick rode into town at noon, his horse lathered from being pushed hard. He burst into the post office, startling Mrs. Henderson, who had been asking about shipping rates. Clara looked up from the counter and immediately knew. "Excuse me, Mrs. Henderson," Clara said. "I need a moment." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, practically vibrating with excitement. She made no move to leave. Patrick crossed the room in 3 long strides. He took both of Clara's hands in his. "Clara Finnegan, I am just a ranch hand with no family and not much money. I live in a bunkhouse and spend my days covered in dust and horse smell. I am not good at fancy words when I am speaking, only when I write. But I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Will you marry me?" Clara did not even hesitate. "Yes." Patrick swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing. Mrs. Henderson burst into applause. Within minutes, half the town knew that the postmistress was engaged to the cowboy who wrote letters. They were married 6 weeks later, in December of 1882, in the same church where they had attended the social. It was a small ceremony, just the preacher and a few witnesses. Clara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew. Patrick wore a new suit that he had purchased with money saved from 6 months of wages. He looked terribly uncomfortable in it, but Clara thought he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. The vows were traditional, but when the preacher asked if Patrick had anything he wanted to add, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote something," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I hope that is all right." "Of course," the preacher said, looking charmed. Patrick unfolded the paper and looked at Clara. "I, Patrick Xavier, promise to write you letters for the rest of our lives. Even when we are old and living in the same house and you are tired of hearing from me. Even when my handwriting gets shaky and my words less eloquent. I promise to notice the small, beautiful things in the world and share them with you. I promise to love you exactly as you are, fierce and independent and smarter than me. I promise to be grateful every single day that my letters found their way to you, even though they were meant for someone else. Because they were always meant for you, I just did not know it yet." Clara was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. "I do not have anything written," she said, "but I promise to read every letter you send me. I promise to write you back. I promise to love the man who sees roadrunners and thinks of laughter, who notices when Kevs gets stuck in bushes, who turns his pain into something beautiful. I promise to be your home." The preacher pronounced them married, and Patrick kissed his wife while Mrs. Henderson cried into her handkerchief, and Mr. Walsh awkwardly patted her shoulder. They spent their wedding night in Clara's room above the general store, which would be their home until they could arrange something better. Patrick carried her up the stairs despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. Inside, he set her down gently and then looked around the small space as if seeing it for the first time. "This is where you live," he said. "This is where we live now," Clara corrected. Patrick pulled her close and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you, Mrs. Xavier. I love you, Mr. Xavier." That night, as they lay together in the narrow bed, Patrick traced patterns on Clara's shoulder with his fingertips. "Can I tell you something?" he asked quietly. "Anything. When Catherine died, I thought my life was over. Not in the dramatic way of dying myself, but in the sense that I thought I would never feel anything real again. I would just go through the motions, working and eating and sleeping, until eventually my body gave out. Those letters were the only thing keeping me tethered to being human, and now here I am, married to the woman who read them. Life is strange and surprising." Clara turned to face him in the darkness. "You still think about her, sometimes," Patrick admitted, "but not in the way I used to. I think about her the way you might remember a dream that felt important when you were having it but fades in the morning light. She was real, and what I felt was real, but it was also very young and dramatic. What I feel for you is different. It is solid and true and built on actual knowing." "I am glad you wrote those letters," Clara said. "Even if they were not meant for me, they brought you to Desdemona. They brought you to my post office. They brought you to me." Patrick kissed her again, slow and deep. Best wrong address in the history of the Postal Service. Clara laughed against his lips. "I will have to include that in my annual report. The first years of their marriage were not easy, but they were good." Patrick continued working at the Triple Bar Ranch, rising before dawn and often not returning until after sunset. Clara kept her position as postmistress, though there was some grumbling from certain quarters about a married woman holding a job. She ignored the complaints and continued sorting mail with the same efficiency she always had. But the letters continued, just as Patrick had promised. Even though they now shared a bed, even though they saw each other every evening, Patrick still wrote to Clara almost daily. Sometimes the letters were long, full of observations about his day and thoughts about their future. Sometimes they were just a few lines, a quick note left on the table for her to find in the morning. Clara wrote back, leaving her letters in Patrick's lunch pail or tucked into the pocket of his coat. They became a private language between them, a way of saying things that felt too big or too vulnerable to speak aloud. In the spring of 1883, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Patrick by leaving a letter on his pillow, too nervous to say the words face to face. When he found it that evening, he read it twice, then swept her into his arms and buried his face in her hair. "Are you happy?" Clara asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am terrified and overjoyed in equal measure," Patrick said honestly. "But yes, I am happy, so happy." Their son was born in November, a healthy baby boy with Patrick's amber eyes and Clara's dark hair. They named him James, after Clara's father. Patrick wrote him a letter on the day he was born, welcoming him to the world and promising to be the best father he could manage. He sealed it and gave it to Clara to keep safe. "For when he is older," Patrick explained. "So he knows what we were thinking the day he arrived." The birth changed things, as births always do. Clara had to reduce her hours at the post office, eventually training a young man named Thomas to help with the daily sorting. Patrick took on extra work at the ranch to compensate for Clara's reduced income. They were exhausted all the time, running on too little sleep and sustained by love and strong coffee. But still, the letters continued. "Dear Clara, I watched you nursing James this morning before I left for work. The sun was just coming up, and you were half asleep in the rocking chair, and I thought my heart would burst from loving you both so much. How did I get so lucky? What did I do to deserve this? Dear Patrick," James smiled today. A real smile, not just gas like the doctor said. He was looking right at me, and he smiled, and I started crying like a fool. I wish you had been here to see it, but I will tell you about it 1,000 times until you are sick of hearing it. Come home safe. We love you. When James was 6 months old, the owner of the Triple Bar Ranch offered Patrick a position as foreman. It came with a small house on the ranch property and a significant increase in wages. Patrick and Clara discussed it late into the night, weighing the pros and cons. "It would mean leaving the post office," Clara said. "The ranch is too far for me to commute daily. Thomas could take over completely." "It would also mean a real home," Patrick pointed out. "Room for James to grow, maybe room for more children if we want them." "Do you want more children?" Clara asked. Patrick considered the question seriously, as he did most things. "I want whatever makes you happy. If you want 12 children, I will do my best to provide. If you want just James, that is perfect too." Clara smiled. "Let us see how we manage with one before we start planning for 12. But yes, I would like more. I would like a whole house full of noise and chaos and love." "Then we should take the job," Patrick said. "It is a good opportunity. We would be foolish to pass it up." They moved to the ranch house in April of 1884. It was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. It had a porch that wrapped around 2 sides and a view of the hills that made Clara catch her breath every time she looked at it. She set up her few possessions, hanging curtains she had sewn herself and arranging her books on a shelf Patrick built. On their first night in the house, after James was asleep in his new room, Patrick and Clara sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge. "You miss the post office?" Patrick asked. Clara thought about it honestly. "A little," she admitted. "I liked having a purpose beyond taking care of the house. I liked being good at something." "You are good at many things," Patrick said. "You are an excellent mother. You are a wonderful wife. You manage our finances better than I ever could. You can identify more plants than anyone I have ever met. You make the best biscuits in Texas." Clara laughed. "My biscuits are passable at best." "They are perfect to me," Patrick insisted. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You could still have a purpose, you know. We have talked about you wanting to write. You could do that now. You have the time and the space." "Write what?" Clara asked, though something in her chest fluttered with possibility. Stories, articles. Whatever you want. You are brilliant with words, Clara. You should use that. Clara leaned her head on Patrick's shoulder. Maybe I will write about a cowboy who wrote letters to the wrong address and accidentally found the right person. People would never believe it, Patrick said, but she could hear the smile in his voice. Their daughter was born in 1885, a tiny thing with a powerful set of lungs. They named her Sarah, after Patrick's mother. Patrick wrote her a letter too, just as he had for James, sealing it away for safekeeping. Life fell into a rhythm. Patrick managed the ranch hands and oversaw the daily operations of the triple bar. Clara took care of the children and the house, and in the quiet moments when both children napped, she began to write. At first, just small things, observations about ranch life and motherhood. But gradually, she grew bolder, crafting stories and essays that she sometimes shared with Patrick and sometimes kept private. When Sarah was 2 and James was 4, Clara sent one of her essays to a newspaper in Dallas. It was about life on a cattle ranch, told from a woman's perspective. She did not tell Patrick she had done it, afraid of jinxing it or setting herself up for disappointment. 3 weeks later, she received a response. The newspaper wanted to publish her essay. They would pay her $5. Clara read the letter 4 times to make sure she was not misunderstanding. Then she ran out to the barn where Patrick was working with a particularly stubborn mare. "They want to publish it," she shouted, waving the letter. "Patrick, they want to publish my writing." Patrick left the mare and crossed to her in seconds. He picked her up and spun her around just as he had the day she agreed to marry him. "Of course they do. You are brilliant." "It is just one essay," Clara cautioned, though she could not stop smiling. "It does not mean anything." "It means everything," Patrick said firmly. "It means you are going to be a published writer. It means you have another purpose, just like you wanted." The essay was published in June under the name Xavier. Clara had debated whether to use her full name or just initials, finally deciding that initials felt more professional. The $5 she earned she saved in a jar on the kitchen shelf, unwilling to spend it on anything practical. It was proof, tangible evidence that her words had value beyond her own home. She wrote more after that, sending essays and short stories to various publications. Some were accepted, most were rejected. But slowly, steadily, she built a small reputation. Editors began to recognize her name. Readers wrote letters commenting on her observations about Western life. Patrick supported every word she wrote, even the ones that never saw publication. He would read her drafts after the children were asleep, offering honest feedback and encouragement. Sometimes Clara would find notes in the margins, little comments or suggestions, and she treasured those as much as his letters, because the letters never stopped. Even after years of marriage, even living in the same house and sharing the same bed, Patrick still wrote to Clara. And Clara still wrote back. They left them for each other in unexpected places, little surprises to brighten ordinary days. "Dear Clara, I found James trying to catch frogs in the creek this afternoon. He was covered in mud and grinning like he had discovered gold. He is so much like you, curious and fearless. I hope he keeps that as he grows. I hope we do not manage to ruin it with too many rules and expectations. Dear Patrick, Sarah asked me today where babies come from. I told her a stork brought them, which is the coward's answer. But she is only 3, and I was not prepared for that conversation. You get to handle the next impossible question she asks. That seems only fair." In 1888, when James was 5 and Sarah was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was more difficult. She was exhausted all the time and struggled to keep food down. Patrick took over more of the household duties, cooking meals and entertaining the children when he was not working. Their second son was born in January of 1889, 2 weeks early and smaller than either of the other children had been. They named him Thomas, after the young man who had taken over Clara's duties at the post office. For the first few weeks, Clara worried constantly about his size, his feeding, whether he was thriving. Patrick wrote her letters reminding her to sleep, to eat, to take care of herself as well as the baby. Dear Clara, Thomas is perfect. Small, yes, but perfect. Stop worrying yourself sick. He is gaining weight, the doctor said so. You are an excellent mother, trust yourself. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, he had caught up to where he should be, and Clara finally allowed herself to relax. Life with 3 children was chaotic in ways she had never imagined, but it was also full of laughter and joy, and the kind of deep satisfaction that came from building something meaningful. Patrick was an involved father, much more so than most men Clara knew. He changed diapers and soothed nightmares and played elaborate games with the children. When people commented on how unusual it was for a man to be so domestic, Patrick would shrug and say that he had not married Clara just to make her do all the work of raising their family. In 1892, the owner of the Triple Bar Ranch died suddenly of a heart attack. His widow, who had no interest in running a cattle operation, offered to sell Patrick the ranch. The price was fair, more than fair really, but it was still an amount that made Clara's head spin. "We could do it," Patrick said as they discussed the offer late one night. "We have been saving. We could take a loan for the rest. It would mean years of debt, but the ranch would be ours." "It would be a huge risk," Clara pointed out. "What if there is a drought? What if cattle prices drop?" "We could lose everything." "We could," Patrick agreed. "Or we could build something lasting, something to pass on to James and Thomas, something that is ours." Clara looked at her husband, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression. "You want to do this," she said. "I do," Patrick admitted. "But not if you are against it. We are partners, Clara. We decide together." Clara thought about the girl she had been, lonely and resigned to a life of sorting other people's mail. She thought about the letters that had changed everything, the wrong address that had led to the right life. She thought about how Patrick had taught her to take risks, to reach for more than what seemed safe and practical. "Let us buy the ranch," she said. They signed the papers in March of 1892. Patrick Xavier, former drifter and ranch hand, became the owner of the Triple Bar Ranch. Clara Xavier, former postmistress, became a ranch owner's wife. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The first year was brutal. They worked from before sunrise until well after dark. Patrick managed the hands and the cattle. Clara kept the books and handled the business side, her years of managing post office accounts proving invaluable. They scrimped and saved, cutting every corner they could find. There were nights when Clara lay awake worrying about making the loan payments, about whether they had made a terrible mistake. But Patrick wrote her letters, as he always did. "Dear Clara, I know you are worried. I am worried too. But I have never regretted taking a risk on love, and I do not regret taking a risk on this ranch. We will make it work, we always do." And they did make it work. Slowly, painfully, but steadily, the ranch became profitable. They paid down the loan. They hired more hands. They expanded their herd. By 1895, the Triple Bar Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region. Clara continued writing throughout it all, somehow finding time between managing accounts and raising 3 children. Her essays were now regularly published in several newspapers. She had even sold a few short stories to magazines. The money she earned was small compared to the ranch income, but it was hers, and it mattered. In 1896, On their 14th wedding anniversary, Patrick gave Clara a gift. It was a wooden box, beautifully crafted with her initials carved into the lid. Inside were letters, hundreds of them. "Every single one I ever wrote you," Patrick explained. "Starting with the ones meant for Catherine and continuing through yesterday. I thought you might want them all in one place." Clara opened one at random. It was from 1887, a short note about seeing a hawk in flight. She remembered receiving it, remembered how she had smiled at Patrick's description of the bird's grace and power. She opened another, this one from 1890, longer and more philosophical, discussing what it meant to be a good father. "I do not know what to say," Clara whispered. "You do not have to say anything," Patrick replied. "I just wanted you to know that every word I wrote was true. Every feeling was real. You have been my whole heart for 14 years, and you will be my whole heart for however many more we get." Clara set down the box and wrapped her arms around her husband. "I love you, Patrick Xavier. Thank you for writing to the wrong address." Patrick laughed and held her close. "Best mistake I ever made." Their children grew. James became interested in ranching, following Patrick around and asking endless questions about cattle and horses and land management. Sarah was more like Clara, curious about everything and always reading whatever books she could get her hands on. Thomas was quieter than both his siblings, but he had a gift for drawing that left both parents amazed. Patrick wrote letters to each of them, just as he wrote to Clara. Not every day, but often enough that each child had a collection of their father's thoughts and love preserved in ink. When James turned 13, Patrick gave him the letter written on the day of his birth, along with all the others accumulated over the years. James read them in his room and emerged red-eyed and grateful. "Did you do this for all of us?" he asked. "I did," Patrick confirmed. "Words are important. Memory is fallible. I wanted you to have something concrete, something you could return to whenever you needed to remember that you are loved." In 1899, Clara's first book was published. It was a collection of essays about life in the West, drawn from years of her observations and experiences. Patrick held the first copy like it was made of spun gold, reading every word despite having read most of them already in draft form. "You did it," he said. "You are an author now, a published author with a book that has your name on the cover." Clara looked at the book, her book, and felt a satisfaction that rivaled even the joy of her wedding day or the births of her children. This was hers, built from her own skill and determination. "I could not have done it without you," she said honestly. "You gave me the time and the support and the belief that it was possible." "I just recognized what was already there," Patrick replied. "You were always meant to write. I am just grateful I got to see it happen." The book sold moderately well, not enough to make them rich, but enough that Clara's editor asked about another one. She began working on a book of short stories, fictional accounts of Western life drawn from her years of experience. In 1902, their oldest daughter Sarah announced she wanted to attend college. She was 17 and determined to study literature. The idea of a young woman going to college was still somewhat scandalous, but Patrick and Clara did not hesitate. "If that is what you want, we will find a way," Clara said. They did find a way, using some of the ranch profits and some of Clara's book earnings. Sarah left for a women's college in Missouri in the fall of 1903. The house felt empty without her, too quiet. Patrick wrote her letters weekly, long missives about life on the ranch and shorter notes just saying he missed her. Sarah wrote back faithfully, describing her classes and her new friends and the overwhelming strangeness of city life. Clara treasured those letters as much as the ones Patrick had written her over the years. James, now 20, was essentially running the ranch alongside Patrick. He had grown into a capable young man, respected by the hands despite his youth. Thomas, at 14, was still finding his way, torn between his love of art and the expectations of ranch life. "Let him choose his own path," Clara advised Patrick one evening. "We did not follow the paths expected of us, and look how well that turned out." "You are right," Patrick agreed. "Though I confess I will miss having him here if he decides to pursue art." "Then we tell him that," Clara said. "We tell him we will miss him and love him and support him whatever he chooses." In 1905, Patrick turned 42 and Clara turned 47. They had been married for 23 years, together for nearly 24. Sometimes Clara would look at Patrick across the dinner table, or working in the barn, or playing with the children, and feel overwhelmed by the impossibility of their story. That his letters, meant for someone else, had found their way to her. That she had been brave enough or foolish enough to respond. That they had built this entire life together from that strange beginning. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara asked Patrick if he ever wondered what would have happened if the letters had gone to the right address. Patrick was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not in the way you might think. I do not wonder if I would be happier. I wonder if I would have survived. If Catherine had gotten those letters and responded, I think I would have stayed trapped in that relationship, always trying to prove myself worthy, always performing love instead of living it. Her death freed me, as terrible as that sounds. It forced me to let go, and then you gave me something real to hold onto instead." "You think she would have approved?" Clara asked. "Of us, I mean." Patrick considered this seriously. "I do not know, I hope so. I like to think that wherever she is glad that something good came from her loss. But even if not, I cannot regret the path that led me to you." Clara took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I should write our story someday," she said. "The true story of how we met. People would never believe it," Patrick replied, echoing what he had said years before. "Maybe not," Clara agreed. "But I would like to write it anyway, for our children and grandchildren, so they know where they came from." "Then write it," Patrick encouraged. "Just change the names to protect the innocent," Clara laughed. "The innocent. We read each other's mail and fell in love. There is nothing innocent about that." "Speak for yourself," Patrick said with mock indignation. "I was completely innocent. You were the one who opened letters that were not addressed to you. And you were the one who kept writing them even after being told to stop," Clara shot back. But she was smiling. "Guilty as charged," Patrick admitted. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "And I will keep writing them until the day I die. You know that, right? Even when we are both old and gray and our hands shake too much to hold a pen properly, I will find a way." "I am already gray," Clara pointed out. Her dark hair had started silvering in her late 30s. "You are beautiful," Patrick said firmly. "You have always been beautiful." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sky shifted from orange to purple to deep blue. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas playing guitar, a new hobby he had taken up. The sound drifted out through the open windows, mixing with the evening sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. In 1908, James married a young woman from a neighboring ranch. Patrick and Clara gained a daughter, and the cycle of life continued. The young couple built a small house on the far side of the Triple Bar property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough for privacy. When James' first child was born in 1909, a boy they named Patrick, Clara held her grandson and marveled at how quickly time was moving. "We are grandparents," she said to Patrick that night. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents?" "I believe it happened gradually while we were busy living," Patrick replied. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. "Who are you writing to?" Clara asked, though she had a suspicion. "Young Patrick," he said. "Welcome to the world letter." Clara smiled and pulled out her own paper. "I suppose I should write one too." They sat side by side at the kitchen table, both writing letters to a baby who would not be able to read them for years. It was absurd and perfect, and Clara would not have had it any other way. Sarah graduated from college in 1907 and returned home for a year, before announcing she was moving to Dallas to work for a newspaper. Clara was proud and terrified in equal measure. Dallas was a long way from the ranch, and the world was not always kind to young women with ambitions. But Sarah had her mother's determination and her father's steady presence, and Clara knew she would find her way. Thomas, meanwhile, had decided to pursue art seriously. At 18, he moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where a community of artists had gathered. He wrote long letters home describing the light and the landscape and the other artists he was meeting. Patrick and Clara supported him, though they missed him terribly. "All our children are living their own lives," Clara said one evening in 1910. "The house is so quiet now." "It is," Patrick agreed, "but they are happy. They are pursuing things they love. We did well by them." "Did we?" Clara asked. "I worry sometimes that we should have pushed them harder to stay, to take over the ranch, to do the practical things." Patrick shook his head. "We pushed them to be themselves. That is harder and more important. James stayed because he wanted to, not because we forced him. Sarah and Thomas left because they needed to, and we let them. That took courage on our part." Clara leaned against him. "When did you get so wise?" "I married a woman who reads my letters and points out when I am being an idiot," Patrick replied. "I learned from the best." In 1912, Clara published her third book, this one a novel loosely based on her own life. She called it Letters to the Wrong Address, and it told the story of a widowed postmaster who discovered love letters meant for someone else. She had changed enough details that their real story was obscured, but Patrick recognized the truth underneath the fiction. "It is good," he said after reading the manuscript, "but you were too kind to me. The real me was much more pathetic." "The real you was perfect," Clara corrected. "You were honest and vulnerable and brave enough to keep writing even when you got no response. That is not pathetic." The book did well, better than Clara's previous publications. Reviewers called it charming and authentic, praising her depiction of Western life and the relationship between the two main characters. Clara received letters from readers, women mostly, saying the story had touched them, made them believe in second chances. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1912, Patrick surprised Clara with a trip. They left the ranch in James's capable hands and traveled by train to San Francisco. It was the farthest Clara had ever been from Texas, and she pressed her face to the train window like a child, taking in the changing landscape. In San Francisco, they stayed in a hotel with electricity and running water and a view of the bay. They walked through the city holding hands, ate at restaurants where they did not recognize half the food on the menu, and attended a play at a grand theater. It was magical and strange, and Clara loved every moment. On their last night there, Patrick took her to the beach. They walked along the sand as the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. The water was cold and gray, nothing like the warm rivers of Texas. "Thank you for this," Clara said, "for everything, for 30 years of letters and love and life." Patrick stopped walking and turned to face her. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Clara took it, recognizing his handwriting immediately. "Another letter, the first one I wrote after we met," Patrick explained. "The one I wrote the night I found out about Catherine. I sealed it and saved it because I was not ready to give it to you then. I am ready now." Clara opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated November 1882. Dear Clara, you read my letters, all of them. The thought should horrify me, but instead I feel relief. For months I have been screaming into the void, and it turns out someone was listening. You were listening. I do not know what happens next. I do not know if I can love again or if I even want to try. But I know that, when I think about seeing you again, my heart beats faster. I know that when I remember the way you looked at me, like I was worth something despite my grief and confusion, I feel hope. Maybe that is enough for now. Maybe hope is where love begins. I am not ready to write this to you directly, so I will seal it away until I am. But I want you to know that even in that first moment, before I had any idea what we would become, you mattered to me. You have always mattered. Yours in hope, Patrick. Clara read the letter twice, then pressed it to her heart. You kept this for 30 years. I kept it until I knew we had made it, Patrick said. Until I knew that the hope I felt that night had been justified. And it was, Clara, everything I hoped for and more. Clara kissed him there on the beach, with the Pacific Ocean roaring behind them and the California sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold. After 30 years of marriage, the kiss still felt like coming home. They returned to the ranch in January of 1913, refreshed and happy. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms. Patrick managed the ranch with James. Clara wrote in the mornings and managed the household in the afternoons. Grandchildren came to visit on weekends, filling the house with noise and chaos. Sarah met a newspaper editor in Dallas and married him in 1914. Thomas had his first art show in Santa Fe in 1915, selling enough paintings to support himself for a year. Patrick and Clara traveled to both events, proud and amazed that these accomplished adults had once been the babies they had rocked and worried over. In 1917, the world erupted into war. America entered the conflict, and suddenly everything felt uncertain. James was too old for the draft, and his position running a ranch that supplied beef to the military kept him exempt. But Clara worried about her sons-in-law, about young men from Desdemona who enlisted with patriotic fervor. Patrick wrote letters during this time that were different from before, darker and more philosophical. He wrestled with questions of mortality and meaning, wondering what kind of world they were leaving for their grandchildren. Dear Clara, I am 54 years old. How did that happen? I look in the mirror and see an old man looking back at me, but inside I still feel like the young cowboy who rode into Desdemona looking for a letter. Time is a strange thief, taking years without permission. But if I have learned anything, it is that time spent loving you has never been wasted. Even one day with you is worth more than a lifetime of anything else. Clara responded as she always did. Dear Patrick, you are not old. You are seasoned. Like a good piece of leather or a well-worn book, you have character and depth that you lacked as a young man. And you are still the most handsome cowboy in Texas, at least to me. Let us not waste energy worrying about time. Let us spend what we have left making more memories. The war ended in 1918, and life gradually returned to normal. The ranch prospered. The grandchildren grew. Clara published another book. Patrick trained horses and managed cattle and wrote letters. In 1922, on their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. James and his wife hosted at their house, inviting what seemed like half of Texas. Sarah and her family came from Dallas. Thomas came from Santa Fe. Friends from Desdemona made the journey to the ranch. Even Mrs. Henderson, now in her 80s, attended. During the party, James stood up to make a speech. I want to talk about my parents, he began. Most of you know their story or think you do. The cowboy who wrote letters, the postmistress who read them. It sounds like a fairy tale, right? But I want you to know what I saw growing up. I saw a father who came home tired every night but always had energy to play with his children. I saw a mother who managed a household and wrote books and never made us feel like we were a burden. I saw two people who wrote each other letters even though they lived in the same house, because they never stopped courting each other. They showed me what love looks like, not the easy romantic version, but the real kind that persists through hard times and exhaustion and disappointment. They showed me that love is a choice you make every single day. So here is to 40 more years of daily choices. Clara cried openly, not bothering to hide it. Patrick held her hand and probably would have cried too if he was the type. Instead, he stood up and addressed the crowd. "I am not good at speeches," he said, "but I am decent at letters, so I wrote one." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and began to read. "Dear Clara, 40 years ago I married the woman who read my mail. People thought we were crazy getting married so quickly. They said it would never last. They said we barely knew each other, but they were wrong. I knew you from those letters you read, from the fact that you cared enough about a stranger's pain to respond. You knew me from the words I wrote, from the vulnerability I showed that I had never shown anyone else. We knew each other in the ways that mattered. These 40 years have proven that. We have built a life together that exceeds anything I imagined when I was a young cowboy with more feelings than sense. We have raised 3 incredible humans. We have built a successful ranch. We have created a home full of love and laughter. And we have written thousands of letters to each other, building a private language of love that no one else can fully understand. I love you, Clara Finnegan, Xavier. I have loved you since the day you wrote back to me. I will love you until my last breath and probably beyond that if there is anything after. Thank you for reading my letters. Thank you for answering. Thank you for building this life with me. Yours always and forever, Patrick." There was not a dry eye in the room. The years continued to pass. In 1925, Clara published what would be her final book, a memoir about life on a cattle ranch. It was her most personal work, drawing heavily on her own experiences. Patrick read it and said it was the truest thing she had ever written. They were getting older now, no way around it. Patrick's hair had gone completely gray and his back bothered him on cold mornings. Clara's eyesight was failing, requiring glasses for reading. They moved slower, tired more easily. But the letters continued, though Patrick's handwriting was shakier now and Clara's responses sometimes took longer as her fingers grew stiff with arthritis. "Dear Clara, I dropped a feed bucket today and could not pick it up without help. Getting old is humiliating. But then I came home and you had made my favorite dinner and the house smelled like comfort, and I thought that getting old with you is still better than being young with anyone else. Dear Patrick, my knees hurt when I climb stairs. My back aches when I stand too long. I forget words I have known my entire life, but when you kiss me good morning, I feel 18 again. Funny how love can make you feel young and old simultaneously." In 1928, Patrick had a health scare. He collapsed while working with cattle, and for a terrifying hour Clara thought she was losing him. But he recovered, the doctor attributing it to heat exhaustion and dehydration. Still, it shook them both. Mortality, which had always been abstract and distant, suddenly felt very real and very close. That night, lying in bed, Patrick said, "I am not afraid of dying, but I am terrified of leaving you." "Then do not leave me," Clara said, as if it were that simple. "Stay here with me, we have more letters to write." Patrick kissed her forehead. "All right," he agreed. "More letters." He recovered fully, but they both became more aware of time's limited nature. They made efforts to see their children and grandchildren more often. They took trips to places they had always talked about visiting. They spent long evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. In 1930, Clara turned 72. She had lived longer than either of her parents, longer than she had ever expected. Patrick threw her a small birthday party, just immediate family, and gave her a gift. It was another wooden box, larger than the first one he had given her. Inside were all the letters he had written in the years since that first box, along with all of Clara's letters to him. Our entire relationship in written form, Patrick explained. Every fight and reconciliation, every joy and sorrow, every ordinary day elevated by the fact that we chose to document it. I thought you might want them all in one place. Clara lifted one of her own letters from 1898 about Thomas learning to walk. She did not remember writing it, but there it was in her handwriting, preserved. There must be thousands of them, she said. Thousands, Patrick confirmed. One for nearly every single day we have been together. Maybe not a perfect record, but close enough. Clara set the letter back carefully. What happens to these when we are gone? We leave them to our children and grandchildren, Patrick said. So they know us not as parents or grandparents, but as people. So they see that we were real and flawed and trying our best. So they know that love is not just the big romantic gestures, but the daily choice to keep showing up. In 1932, Patrick turned 70. The ranch was now fully run by James and his oldest son, with Patrick serving more as a consultant than active manager. He spent his days training horses, a task that was less physically demanding than working cattle and writing letters. Clara's health began to decline that year. She had trouble breathing sometimes, struggling to climb even the few steps to their bedroom. The doctor said her heart was wearing out, that there was nothing to be done but rest and take it easy. Taking it easy, Clara complained to Patrick one afternoon. I have never taken it easy in my life. I do not know how to start now. Then we will learn together, Patrick said. He had moved their bedroom downstairs to spare her the steps. He brought her books from the library in town and read to her when her eyes were too tired to focus. He made her tea and sat with her for hours, neither of them needing to fill the silence with words, but the letters continued. Clara could no longer write as easily, her hands too unsteady, so she dictated to Patrick. He would write her words in his own handwriting, then read them back to make sure he had captured exactly what she meant. Dear Patrick, I have been thinking about the first letter you wrote that I opened. The one about the sunrise and eyes. I wonder what Catherine's eyes looked like. Were they blue like the canyon sky at noon? Were they brown like good earth? I know I should not be jealous of a dead woman, but sometimes I am. Not because you loved her, but because she got to see you first. She got to be the one you wrote those early letters to, full of all that young passion and desperate longing. But then, I remember that I got everything else. I got 49 years of letters meant only for me. I got a life built on actual knowing, not just romantic fantasy. I got children and grandchildren and a love that grew deeper with time instead of fading. So maybe I got the better deal after all. Patrick wrote her response for her, but he also wrote his own letter that night. Dear Clara, you got the better deal because you are the better deal. Catherine was young and exciting and represented possibility. But you are home. You are every good thing I have ever known made tangible. You are the person who saw all of me and chose to stay. That is worth more than 1,000 romantic sunrises. And your eyes, just so you know, are the color of strong coffee, dark and warm and essential to my existence. Clara laughed when he read that to her. Essential coffee eyes, she said. That might be the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. I mean it, Patrick insisted. I know you do. That is why it is romantic. By the spring of 1933, Clara rarely left her bed. She was not in pain, she assured everyone, just tired. So very tired. Patrick spent his days at her side, leaving only when James or one of the grandchildren came to sit with her. He brought her meals she barely touched and read her letters they had written to each other over the decades. "You have any regrets?" Clara asked him one afternoon. "None," Patrick said immediately. Then, more honestly, "Well, maybe one. I wish I had met you sooner. I wish we had more time." "We had exactly the right amount of time," Clara corrected. "We had 49 years, which is more than most people ever get, and it was enough because we did not waste it. We filled it with letters and love and life. Not everyone can say that." Patrick took her hand, careful of how fragile it felt. "I do not know how to exist without you," he admitted. "You will figure it out," Clara said with confidence she probably did not feel. "You figured out how to exist after Catherine died. You figured out how to love again. You are more resilient than you think." "That was different," Patrick protested. "I barely knew Catherine. We had 3 months together. You and I have had a lifetime." "Then you know that love does not end with death," Clara said. "You will carry me with you just as you carried her. Except I will have actually known you, really known you, and that will matter." On a Tuesday morning in late May, Clara did not wake up. She passed peacefully in her sleep, Patrick beside her as he had been for thousands of nights before. He woke at dawn as he always did, turned to tell her good morning and realized she was gone. For a long moment, he simply lay there holding her hand, not ready to let the world change irrevocably. Then he got up and wrote her a letter, the last one she would never read. "Dear Clara, you left me this morning. I knew it was coming, but I was not prepared. How could anyone prepare for this? The world feels wrong without you in it. The sun still rose like it was any other day, which seems like a cosmic insult. But I understand now what you meant about carrying someone with you. I feel you in every corner of this house. I hear you in every word I write. You said I would figure out how to exist without you, and maybe I will. But I do not want to. I do not want a life that does not have you in it. Still, I will try. I will keep breathing and waking up and going through the motions because that is what you would want. Because you deserve to have your love honored by a man who keeps living, not one who gives up. I love you, Clara Finnegan, Xavier. Thank you for reading my letters. Thank you for answering. Thank you for every single day. Yours, even in death, Patrick." He sealed the letter and placed it in the box with all the others. Then he called for James and began the difficult work of saying goodbye. The funeral was held 3 days later. It seemed like everyone from 3 counties attended. Clara had touched many lives with her writing and her kindness. Patrick stood at the gravesite, accepting condolences and hearing stories about how Clara had helped or inspired people. He nodded and thanked them, but inside he felt hollow. That night, alone in the house that was too big and too quiet, Patrick sat at the kitchen table and read through old letters. He found ones from their early courtship, full of uncertainty and hope. He found ones from the middle years, about children and ranching and building a life. He found recent ones, written when they both knew time was running out. In every single one, regardless of when it was written, he found evidence of love. Real, honest, complicated, beautiful love. The next morning, Patrick wrote a letter. Not to Clara exactly, since she was gone and could not read it, but to the idea of her, to the memory of her, to the space she had occupied in his life for 49 years. "Dear Clara, I am still here. I do not know why. I do not know what I am supposed to do with the rest of my life. But I woke up this morning, and the sun had the audacity to be beautiful. I saw a roadrunner, just like I did all those years ago when I wrote you about it. It made me smile, just for a moment, before the grief came back. I think you would be pleased about that. You always said I needed to notice the small, beautiful things, so I will keep noticing them, and I will tell you about them in these letters, even though you will never read them. Maybe that is the point. Maybe love is not about the receiving but about the continual choosing to express it. Patrick wrote to Clara every day for the next 4 years. He told her about the grandchildren growing up, about James running the ranch, about Sarah's journalism career and Thomas's art. He told her about changes to Desdemona, about improvements to the ranch, about horses he trained and calves that were born. He never remarried, though several well-meaning friends and family members suggested it. The idea felt absurd to Patrick. How could he replace Clara? She had not been a position to be filled but a once-in-a-lifetime connection. In the spring of 1937, Patrick turned 74. He was in good health, all things considered, still active and engaged with the ranch. But he missed Clara with an ache that never truly faded. Every morning he woke up reaching for her. Every evening he turned to tell her something before remembering she was not there. On May 15, 1937, exactly 4 years after Clara's death, Patrick had a heart attack while working in the barn. James found him an hour later, sitting against a stall door with a peaceful expression on his face. In his pocket was a sealed envelope addressed to Clara. James opened it later, after the funeral arrangements had been made. Inside was Patrick's final letter. "Dear Clara, I think I am dying. My chest hurts and I cannot quite catch my breath. I should probably call for help, but honestly, I am ready. 4 years without you has been 4 years too long. I have done what you asked. I kept living. I noticed the beautiful things. I loved our family and kept writing letters and tried to honor your memory with a life well lived. But I am tired, my love. I am ready to stop. I hope, wherever you are, that I will find you. I hope there is some version of existence where we can be together again. If not, then I am grateful for the 49 years we had. It was enough. It had to be. I love you, Clara. I will love you beyond death and beyond time and beyond anything that comes next. Wait for me if you can. Yours forever, Patrick." James carefully placed the letter in the wooden box with all the others, thousands of them documenting a love story that had spanned nearly 50 years. He passed the box down to his children, and they passed it to theirs, a tangible record of what love looked like when it was real and honest and maintained through daily effort. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. The house where Patrick and Clara lived was preserved, turned into a sort of museum by their great-great-grandchildren who wanted to honor their story. The boxes of letters were archived, protected, studied by historians and romantics alike, who could not quite believe that 2 people had actually written to each other every single day for decades. In Desdemona, Texas, there is now a plaque at the old post office building. It reads, "Here, in 1882, Postmistress Clara Finnegan received letters meant for someone else and found the courage to respond. Her choice to reach across loneliness and isolation created a love story that lasted a lifetime and continues to inspire generations. May we all be brave enough to answer when love writes to us, even when it arrives at the wrong address." The story of the cowboy who wrote letters and the postmistress who read them became a legend in Texas, passed down through families and shared at gatherings. People debated whether it was romantic or an invasion of privacy. They argued about whether Clara should have done things differently, whether Patrick should have moved on from Catherine sooner. But those who understood, who really understood, saw it for what it was. 2 lonely people who found each other through words and built something lasting. They saw the daily choice to keep writing, keep responding, keep showing up. They saw love not as a lightning bolt or a fairy tale, but as a letter written faithfully every single day, regardless of circumstance. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The letters existed. The love was real. And somewhere, maybe, Patrick and Clara were together again, still writing to each other, still finding new things to say after an eternity of conversation. Because that is what love is. The refusal to stop communicating, even when it would be easier to be silent. The choice to keep reaching out, keep expressing care, keep documenting the small moments that make up a life. Patrick and Clara understood that, and they lived it fully. Their letters were proof that love, real love, is both simple and profound. It is grand romantic gestures and daily mundane check-ins. It is passion and comfort. It is the wrong address that turns out to be exactly right. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and separation. But it also never really ended, because the words remained. Thousands of letters, each one a small act of love, collectively forming something immortal. Future generations would read those letters and feel the love radiating from the pages. They would know that once in Texas, two people loved each other with such devotion that they wrote about it every single day for 49 years. And maybe that is the truest form of immortality. Not living forever, but loving so completely that the evidence of that love outlasts you. Patrick and Clara achieved that. Their letters ensured that their love story would never truly die, would never be forgotten. The wrong address had led to the right life, and that life had been documented in ink and paper and preserved for anyone who needed proof that real love, lasting love, patient daily love was possible. All you had to do was be brave enough to open the first letter, be honest enough to respond, be committed enough to keep writing day after day, year after year, until death finally silenced the pen. Patrick and Clara did that. They wrote their love story one letter at a time, and it was beautiful.